and all the adults that are in the house, so everybody needs to be warm. And really the most important question we ask is, what is the sleeping arrangement? I might have said to you, I think in our first year we got out 1,500 blankets, and 5 kids out of that 1,500 had their own beds. So there's lots of bed sharing, floor sleeping, car sleeping, carport sleeping, that sort of thing. So they are going directly to particular families, but they are families already with an agency or under public health services.
It's well organised too. Well done, Bernie. Congratulations on what you did this past winter, and, thank you.
No, thank you for your time, Jim. Appreciate the support.
That's Bernie Harfleet.
That's so amazing, isn't it? Because I bet that what they've done there has prevented a whole lot of illnesses that would have otherwise happened when people aren't warm enough.
I'm sure.
Respiratory illnesses and things.
What he says about the realisation that anybody can fall from grace, that is so true. Now, I want, especially with you on, Nikki, to ask you about, well, first of all, the diet-related disease symposium was on in Wellington today. It's just wrapped up for the day, I think. New Zealand, 3rd highest levels of obesity in the OECD. You knew about this, didn't you? Yeah,
in fact, I was disappointed not to be able to get to it, but I think the point here is really, we're looking for news out of these kinds of symposiums, but actually the main thing to come out of it probably is that there is nothing new. We've still got the same problems that we've had for years, and the public health experts are still calling for the same things that they've been calling for years, and nothing much has happened. We need some political will now to make some of these things happen.
All right.
It was good to see that David Clark was there today.
How much truth is there to some of these claims we saw from a nutritionist in Australian media today, Kathleen Aliam, who's a nutrition and exercise scientist and author of What's Eating You? This is to do with the most unfulfilling or unfilling foods you can eat. And some of them make sense, like salty snacks. Is it true that added salt makes people eat more food and calories regardless of how much fat is in the meal? Yeah,
I don't know about that one. I hadn't heard that claim before. It sounds plausible, possibly. It would probably depend on what the food was that was attached to the salt, or the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's certainly in a lot of pubs and restaurants, the food has quite a high salt content to make people thirsty
drink more.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely not a myth.
Yeah.
Barbara Drever has been released now in Nauru, so that's some good news as we close the hour. I've got a bit more to ask Nikki.
It is
salads.
Good news.
Yeah, it's salads.
Yeah.
Not good news, especially for lunch. You're not getting enough satisfying sustenance to keep you going until dinner.
Well, I think it would totally depend on the salad there. I mean, if it's just leaves, then no, you're definitely not getting enough. You're not getting satiety. This whole thing, I mean, it's kind of a spurious headline, but what this is about is satiety, which is that feeling of fullness, or and having enough so that you don't feel starving or go picking at everything in sight until you're satisfied. It's a feeling of satisfaction. So a salad to give you satiety has to not only have green leaves in it, it's got to have some protein in it, it's got to have some fat in the form of a dressing, and it's got to have some carbohydrates and some kind of healthy carbs in there too. So
a bit of chicken.
A salad with some leaves and some chicken and some avocado and a nice olive oil dressing and some maybe kumara or pumpkin or something like that would be a satisfying salad that would not make you hungry afterwards.
Avocado is demon slime fruit.
Demon slime fruit.
Avocado's so good.
Neil Miller, Nikki Bazant on the panel. Thank you very, very much, both of you.
Always welcome.
And the panel's back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Here's Checkpoint.
Tō tumaira e hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Tonight, TVNZ's Pacific correspondent Barbara Drever has just been released by police in Nauru. She was talking to refugees who had been held in a detention centre when she was detained. We will have the latest. We've spoken to World Vision, who jacked the meeting up. Several high-profile harness racing people have had their homes raided after a 17-month police organised crime investigation into horse race fixing. A New Zealand woman lying gravely ill in a Bali hospital did not declare a pre-existing bowel condition. We've spoken to her insurer, and national MPs signed privacy waivers to hand over their communications dating back to the start of February.
RNZ News at 5. Maloa Lele, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten, tēnei. TVNZ Pacific correspondent Barbara Drever has been released after being detained by authorities in Nauru for some time this afternoon. Ms Drever is there to cover the annual Pacific Islands Forum. RNZ's reporter on Nauru says it's understood Ms Drever was taken to the police station on the island after trying to interview a refugee at one of the refugee camps. World Vision New Zealand says it helped Barbara Drever connect with refugees on Nauru and it was contacted by its liaison person this afternoon. It says Ms Drever's interview had been stopped by the Nauru police and she was taken away by them. The Nauru government has limited the movements of journalists covering the summit and placed restrictions on who they can talk to. The police say they spent a lot of time investigating before carrying out raids at properties linked with race fixing today. They searched 10 properties and stables, 8 in Christchurch, 1 in Invercargill and another in Manawatu as part of Operation Inca. Detective Superintendent Tim Anderson says they're likely to lay charges today and arrests could follow. Mr Anderson says they've been keeping a close watch for some time.
The National Organised Crime Group, as I said earlier, began the investigation around April last year. There's a fairly tight team of investigators who have spent hours on this and have done a very thorough job.
Tim Anderson says they began their investigation after being supplied with information from the Racing Integrity Unit and haven't ruled out widening their investigation. The Chief Ombudsman is calling for urgent action at Whanganui Prison to tackle inmate violence, intimidation and a pervasive gang influence. It follows an unannounced visit in February. Peter Bosher says 2 of the prison's units had the highest number of recorded assaults of all lower North Island prisons. Nearly half of the prison population, which holds medium to high-risk male offenders, identified as gang members or affiliates. Judge Bosher says 71% of prisoners were too afraid to report violence for fear of retribution.
An urgent issue for us is the extent to which gangs are in control, are intimidating, are using violence and are producing a very unhealthy situation.
Peter Bosher says a strategy must be put in place to minimise violence and gang activity. The lawyer for the man who has admitted siphoning off $1.2 million from the trust that cares for the Waitangi treaty grounds says there's little hope of the money being paid back. Wallace Tamamotu Te Ahuru appeared this morning in the Manukau District Court, where he admitted 2 charges of obtaining by deception and 7 of using forged documents. Te Ahuru used his position as the Trust's corporate services manager to transfer $1.2 million to his own accounts. He spent it on cosmetic surgery, gambling, adult entertainment and a new vehicle. His lawyer, Jeremy Bialetti, says Te Ahuru spent some of the money on failed investments, so recovering any looks unlikely. He'll be sentenced in November. The Prime Minister says the allegations levelled against the sidelined Minister, Meka Whaitiri, have been contested, which is why an investigation is necessary. Ms Whaitiri has stepped aside as Customs Minister during an employment inquiry and will not be present at Parliament this week. RNZ News understands Ms Whaitiri is accused of manhandling her newly employed press secretary while in Gisborne last Monday. In question time, the National Party leader, Simon Bridges, pressed for more details in this question to Jacinda Ardern.
Did she ask the Honourable Meka Whaitiri directly what happened?
It is fair to say that the allegation is contested, which is why it's being dealt with by Ministerial Services, and that is appropriate.
Jacinda Ardern responding to Simon Bridges in Parliament. Meanwhile, the police say they've spoken to the alleged victim after receiving a complaint from an unrelated third party, but will not be taking any further action. A resident of the West Auckland property where an explosion in a shed killed a man last night says the man used the building to work on cars. The blast rocked neighbouring houses on Universal Drive in Henderson and left debris hanging in a nearby tree. The resident, who didn't want to be named, has been unable to go back into the house and only returned this morning to collect his belongings from the cordon. He says the building where the explosion happened was used as a tool shed.
Pretty much your basic decked out petrol head 7, you know, any size spanner, ring spanner, drill, screw, anything like it, you'll find it in there. Compressor do like filling up tyres, or you know, just for blowing off dust and things like that. It was like a heaven for all men who love working on cars.
A West Auckland resident. It's 5:05. Sport. The unseeded Australian John Millman has turned the US Tennis Open upside down with a colossal fourth-round upset win over 20 times Grand Slam champion Roger Federer. Millman left Federer and fans at Arthur Ashe Stadium shell-shocked with a comeback victory to book a quarter-final date with another of tennis's all-time greats, Novak Djokovic. Warriors star Roger Tuivasa-Sheck and Simon Mannering were missing from today's training session ahead of round 1 of the NRL finals against the Penrith Panthers on Saturday. Both players were injured in the 20-16 win over the Canberra Raiders, leaving coach Stephen Kearney in a race against time to get them fit for the weekend.
They were inside today. One was on the Ultra G, which is a treadmill inside, which takes the weight off the player, and been in for physio and all of that, so not just relaxing, getting ready to play.
Stephen Kearney. The All Blacks are looking forward to some serious competition this week after Argentina's convincing wins against South Africa under new coach Mario Ledesma. The All Blacks will face the Pumas in the Rugby Championship on Saturday night, and assistant coach Ian Foster says based on their current form, they're hoping for the same level of competition.
We've got a plan going through the Rugby Championship, or like any series, where we're trying to build depth, build combinations and grow our game. So the fact that Argentina have come off a really good win hasn't changed our strategy. It's probably just heightened our awareness that they're a team that if we don't play well against, we're going to struggle with. So it means the whole prep probably goes up another couple of cogs, which is great.
Ian Foster. That's the news.
Politicians' travel spending comes under scrutiny.
When we do our budgeting, we budget for fuel. It's quite an important part of flying an aeroplane.
Well, the government steps in on Auckland's turf.
I have disagreed with the Minister when he said we're not delivering, and I've sent him a copy of the latest building consents.
And a red, white and blue wash of history.
There are elements within our nation who are upset that this film does not depict Neil Armstrong unfurling the American flag.
Flagging the big stories, Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Pacific artist Fatu Fa'uu on the mammoth artwork he's created to highlight the issue of youth mental health. And after 10, Ingrid Coles, who was interned in a Japanese concentration camp in Indonesia as a child and who's made her life in New Zealand. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty in Taupō. Occasional showers, some heavy, becoming isolated this evening and fine breaks increasing. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms easing north of Wairoa tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti, occasional rain or showers, gales southerlies about Taranaki. Wairarapa and Wellington, periods of rain, heavy at times, southerlies, gale in exposed places. Bulla to Fiordland, also Nelson and inland Marlborough, fine. For the remainder of Marlborough, also Canterbury, mostly cloudy with scattered showers clearing south of Christchurch tonight. Gale southerlies about the Marlborough Sounds, easing tomorrow. Otago and Southland, areas of cloud clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Fog about some inland valleys tomorrow morning. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, the odd shower clearing early tomorrow. It's 9 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Thank you everyone for joining us. We begin tonight in Nauru, where TVNZ journalist Barbara Drever has just been released after being detained by police while speaking with refugees being held in Australia's offshore detention centre on the tiny islands. Conditions in the centres have been the subject of extensive media coverage in the run-up to the Pacific Islands Forum Summit, which is being held there, of course. World Vision New Zealand organised for Ms Drever to be able to access refugees, and just before we came on air, their CEO, Grant Baildon, told me what had happened.
World Vision arranged for Barbara to be able to meet with refugees while she was on Nauru. For us, it was really important that the voices of the children there and their families came out, despite the obvious attempts by the Nauru government and the Australian government too over the years to silence those and make sure the world didn't hear them. So we facilitated that, and then we heard just a little while ago from our liaison there that just partway through an interview very early on that the Nauru police had come and shut it down and detained Barbara.
And did Barbara have a cameraman or woman with her as far as you're aware, and were they detained as well? Do you know that?
Yeah, my understanding is that she didn't. It was just her by herself in this case.
And do you know, Grant, where the meeting was taking place?
No, I don't. And those meetings were intentionally just happening under the radar, is my understanding, because obviously the Nauru government doesn't really respect freedom of speech.
That's Grant Bailden. Now, I spoke to him at about 4:45. Just minutes later, we heard Ms. Drever had been released. But at that stage, Grant Bailden was insisting the New Zealand government should do whatever is required to get her out, and also to insist the detention centres are able to be covered by journalists currently in the country for the forum.
It's really important, of course, that New Zealand government does support her. We understand there's an MFAT official with her now, and I'm confident they'll do everything that they can. It's also important that the issues that Barbara was reporting on really get a good airing at the Pacific Islands Forum. You know, the Pacific Islands Forum stands for little if it comes together, and yet fails to comment on such terrible human rights abuses going on just kilometres from the meeting.
And those human rights abuses, as World Vision describes from their CEO, Grant Bailden, were precisely what Barbara Drever was reporting on. We'll have more from Nauru later on Checkpoint, and we'll update you on her situation. But we understand she is out. There was an MFAT person with her, and they have both gone from whatever police detention facility they were being held in, or police station. It's 12 minutes past 5. Thanks for being with us on Checkpoint. Police have raided 10 properties and stables across Christchurch, Invercargill and the Manawatu following a 17-month-long organised crime group investigation into horse race fixing and corruption. A number of high-profile leading harness racing people are in the spotlight, and a number of arrests were expected to be made this afternoon or this evening. After 6 o'clock tonight, we'll hear from Detective Superintendent Tim Anderson, who's speaking on behalf of the investigation. It is a big one, and it has been conducted at senior levels. But first, let's hear from veteran racing rider of 40 years, Barry Lichter. A short time ago, he told me he knows a number of the people involved.
Well, obviously the police have raided they say 10 stables, 8 in Canterbury, 1 in Invercargill, 1 in Manawatu. Not all stables, some houses as well. So from my information, there are trainers and drivers involved. I probably can't tell you who they are at this stage because that hasn't been confirmed, but it involves a lot of the leading people in Canterbury, John.
Yeah, and they are known to you. These would be people you'd know very well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is this a shock?
It is. I mean, you're probably naive to think that race fixing has never happened in New Zealand, but I would be extremely surprised. Certainly not widespread. I'd be surprised if it happens at all. But, you know, if you're the police, you don't mount an operation of this magnitude, John, unless you've got some fairly solid evidence, I would have thought.
Yeah. So forgive me, because I am speculating, and you know this business a trillion times better than I do, but race fixing would consist, I guess, if it exists, on some horses being held back with a view to allow a preordained horse to do better. Would that be how it works, so everyone could back that horse? Would that be what we were talking about?
Yes, exactly, yeah. I mean, there are plenty of checks and balances in the system, John, for catching horses that aren't run on their merits. Like stipendiary stewards are always looking out for horses who aren't, or who are driven wrongly or badly, or they suspect are driven not to win, and there are fines and disqualifications handed out for that. And they have, the Racing Integrity Unit have betting analysts who actually look at unusual betting patterns on races too, where somebody makes a killing on a race, or there are, you know, more people betting on a particular horse if they suspect there's been a suspicious drive. And there are plenty of examples in both codes where horses are not driven on their merits, or they're driven cold, Sometimes horses have quiet runs when they come back from spells or from injury. There are often occasions where horses are not given hard runs before feature races. The one that jumps to mind is a galloper called Surface Paradise, who won the Cox Plate in 1991, and his lead-up race at Ellerslie, I think he beat one home, and they immediately jumped on the trainer and had a big inquiry, thinking it wasn't on its merits. But, I mean, this is on a completely different level. They obviously must suspect some collusion between drivers. It's not just a single horse involved, because they've been confiscating people's computers today, so they obviously think there's some kind of trail that they can pick up on.
But Barry, how important is it that whatever's happened here, and once again this is sub judice, and people have the right to be seen as innocent until proven guilty, full stop, but how important is it that the industry is able to persuade the people who keep it going by betting on races that there is not race fixing in New Zealand?
Absolutely crucial, John. I mean, that's the one prime factor of anything to do with racing, and people will not bet on an event or on a code where they think that horses aren't being ridden or driven to their merits. There's nothing more important. I mean, and the whole racing industry survives on betting. That's why there's been so much worry in the recent years where betting's dropping, because if betting goes down and there's no confidence in betting, then everybody in the industry suffers.
But Barry, I don't want to make you speculate or try and attribute any motive or assume guilt, but the names that we've heard, there are some fairly well-off individuals who have been named. What on earth would be worth the risk to those people? Can you even begin to speculate about that?
Well, I would have thought nothing. I mean, some of these people are the most respected in our industry. I mean, obviously where punting's involved, there are underhanded things go on, but the punter involved who the police raided this morning, I actually know him personally, and I've actually been in his presence when he's called trainers for information. It's quite common practice for punters and owners to ring their own trainers or other trainers to get information on which horses from their stable they think are going to go well. I mean, that happens all the time. And the person involved in this case, I've been there when he's run trainers to get information. I actually wrote a story about him in the Sunday Star Times about 4 years ago because he was so successful at punting that the TAB restricted the amount of money he could put on. But I would doubt for 1 second that he's involved in anything underhanded. I mean, he's just got a very good network of trainers who he's got horses in their stables, and he rings them up and says, "Hey, mate, which of your horses are the ones that I should back?" And everybody does that. I do it myself. You try and get the best information you can. So the fact, but I mean, you'd suspect that there must be something in the betting trail that's alerted the Racing Integrity Unit to get the police involved, because it's much more serious than simply a racing inquiry to have police mounting the investigation.
And the police mounting the investigation will join us on Checkpoint later on the program. We are expecting arrests tonight, a 17-month investigation. We'll have more on Checkpoint when the Detective Superintendent to Madison joins us after 6. It's 18.5 minutes past 5. Checkpoint has today been told that a woman lying gravely ill in a Bali hospital did not declare a pre-existing condition to her insurer. The Hartleys have repeatedly refused to say who their insurer is, but the Balinese hospital itself today confirmed Abby Hartley was insured with Covermore Insurance through Air New Zealand. They said Mrs. Hartley appeared to have not disclosed a pre-existing bowel condition before she and her husband Richard left for a second honeymoon in Bali last month. Mrs. Hartley fell ill with a twisted bowel and contracted a blood infection, and her family says she's now in a coma. A Give a Little fundraising page was closed on Friday after more than $237,000 was raised towards her hospital bills and a Medivac flight home. Covermore would not be interviewed, but in a statement, it's quite a long statement. A spokesperson says its thoughts are with Abby and her family. Lots of speculation on why the insurer is not paying out. This is Covermore's statement. We assess all our cases with care, compassion and equity, and our starting point is that travel insurance is meant to protect you from the unforeseen and the unexpected when you decide to travel. We rely on our customers being completely open and upfront with us about the state of their health and encourage our customers to disclose any existing medical conditions they they have at the time they buy their travel insurance. There are many existing medical conditions we automatically cover and many more we can cover after assessment. So that's the statement by the insurer who is not paying out. I asked the Insurance Council CEO, Tim Grafton, if it is possible to get insurance and travel with a pre-existing condition.
Yes, you can. Typically, if you went onto an insurer's website or you were to talk to the insurer, there'll be a number of conditions that will be covered, but there'll be certain conditions attaching. So, for instance, if you'd had a hip replacement within the last 10 years, the procedure was done more than 6 months ago, you weren't displaying any post-operative complications, then that would be something that would be covered.
Okay.
So you can, but you can also say, typically they'll have a list of the kind of conditions where you, as long as you're not displaying any need for medical treatment, but also you might have something that's not on the list. So you might say, offer that up to the insurer. They'll probably want to ask more questions, and then they will decide whether they want to accept the risk or not. And if they do, there may be an increase in the premium. But if they don't, it's probably a pretty strong signal to you, should I be travelling? Because if something goes wrong, this could create a major cost for me.
Okay, so if the insurer won't touch you, then that is, I guess, implicitly, in fact, quite explicitly suggests that maybe you should stay at home. Is it still possible to get travel insurance with the pre-existing condition not covered? So everything else is covered, being hit by the apocryphal bus is covered, but the pre-existing condition is not covered.
Yes. So you should declare it to your insurer, and then that will be quite a specific thing that's not covered on your policy. So you'll receive a policy that tells you what you're covered for, and you won't be covered for that. But travel insurance, of course, has a lot of other benefits. It covers you for, cancellations. A volcano might be erupting or something like that, so all planes are cancelled from your holiday destination, or loss or theft of property. All those sorts of things as well. So it does carry other benefits.
Right. Tim, people are, and I'm sorry to sound rude to a guest on Checkpoint, but people can be a bit cynical about insurance companies. So let's use the example of a volcano erupting. If you are hit by a rock thrown out of a volcano, and you have a pre-existing cancer condition, for example, are the insurance company not going to pay out on your claim because of that pre-existing condition?
No. So what's happened here is that a sudden event has occurred, an accident. You've been hit by a rock that has led to the need to have medical treatment for the damage that the rock has done to you. So that's covered. If that led to complications that were related to your cancer, then it's your cancerous condition that would be looked at. But you're talking about a rock, a road accident or something like that. No, you're covered.
Have you spoken to Covermore, who are the insurer in this case? Have you spoken to them about this specific case?
I personally haven't done.
Has anyone that you work with?
Yes, we made an inquiry, we being the Insurance Council of New Zealand, to see whether any of our members were involved in this situation, and we were confidentially told by the insurer that they were, and on the condition of that confidence. So,
thank you.
I don't want to get into the particularities of this case, but yes, I did. I mean, I don't think I've got to apologise.
No, absolutely not. No, not at all. But do you support Covermore's decision here? Do you think their decision is fair and reasonable in the context of what they were told?
Look, I don't know sufficient about the ins and outs of everything, but all I can say in general terms, that if it was a condition that an insurer would not take the risk on for, then that should have been declared, and if they have declined the claim, then that's a consequence of what the policy does or does not cover. if you open the door to people not declaring and then expecting to be covered, then you've got to be asking the question about what the purpose of insurance is. I mean, it's a very sad situation. There's no doubt about it. And Kiwis have got big hearts, and they've come out and they've supported the family. So that's how it's worked out. But the question is, and there was a lot of commentary publicly that, the insurer should be paying up. But, the question just has to be asked, what were the facts? What was the presumption here? I mean, there was a former politician on the panel just a few days ago saying there should have been a pay-up. Where was the sort of, let's stop, think, and where are all the facts here, Does somebody court public opprobrium lightly, So, getting to the facts of the situation, I think, is something that's healthy, and I haven't yet heard any criticism made from those involved with respect to the insurer.
Tim Grafton from the Insurance Council. It's 26 minutes past 5. National MPs have signed privacy waivers that mean they'll now be forced to hand over their communications dating back to the start of February. The aim is to find out whether the leaking of Simon Bridges' expenses came from within the party. Yes, this story. The inquiry, led by PwC and Simpson Grierson, will also aim to identify the person who sent a text claiming to be a National MP and pleading for the parliamentary inquiry to be called off for mental health reasons. With the latest on this saga, here's our political reporter Jo Moyer.
Simon Bridges' expenses were first made public on August 13 after the details of his $83,000 travel bill were leaked to Newshub. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, launched an inquiry, but after the text, he canned that, saying it was a matter for the National Party. That prompted National to launch its own inquiry to attempt to uncover the leaker's identity, but the period being forensically investigated by PwC dates back to the start of February. Mr Bridges says it's appropriate for the investigation to cover a 7-month period.
Look, I think simply because if we're going to do this, we want to do it well, and to do that and to give PwC here the best chance of doing the thorough job, you do want a time period in which to do it.
The investigation start date coincides with the time rumours about the National Party leadership under Bill English started circulating. Barely 2 weeks later, he was gone. On February 8, the caucus gathered in Tauranga for a retreat, which was hosted by Simon Bridges, who would go on to become the leader. PwC will conduct the forensic work, and lawyers at Simpson Grierson will be responsible for filtering what information is and isn't passed on to Mr Bridges and his deputy Paula Bennett. Mr Bridges has given an assurance that no communications between journalists and MPs, outside of the terms of reference of the inquiry, will be passed on to him.
There is a filter for this from PwC to Simpson Grierson before it would come to us. For it to come, and when I say us, myself and the Deputy Leader, for it to come to me, it would only be in relation to the leak and the text. It would have nothing to do with journalists, journalistic privilege. I take those issues seriously, and I can assure you they form no part of this.
Senior MP Judith Collins says she's no stranger to inquiries and is happy to oblige.
I've done it so many times.
Really?
No.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
No, well, you must remember I have already undergone the Chisholm inquiry, which took 6 years of all of my details. So I have no problem handing over mine.
Simon Bridges says it was advice from PwC that guided the decision to span the investigation across 7 months. PwC declined to comment on the matter. As for how long the investigation will take, Paula Bennett summed it up best.
As long as it takes.
From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Jo Moyer.
We are getting a lot of feedback from people who are talking to us about their experience of using travel insurance. This from Adrian. Quite an striking example of the sort of stuff that's coming in great detail already. It's an email. Thanks, Adrian. We are a couple travelling in Greece. We had a scooter accident a couple of days ago. My partner broke his leg, and has had to have surgery in Greece. We hired the scooter with a valid New Zealand motorcycle licence, had helmets, and no speed or alcohol was involved. When we made a claim on our travel insurance, they declined our claim on the grounds that we didn't use an international driver's licence. The scooter operator carefully cited my partner's valid New Zealand motorcycle licence, and all the paperwork was done correctly. There was no mention made of the need for an international licence. We have so far had to pay close to $20,000 for his medical care in Greece, and we are still in Greece and yet to deal with the cost of rescheduling our flights and accommodation. My feeling is that our insurer was looking for a reason not to accept our claim right from my first contact with them. That and from Adrian, lots of people saying things like insurance companies are in the business of taking your money and finding reasons not to give it back. Others saying they agree with Tim Grafton and the insurer's position here. Thank you for your feedback. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz or text us on 2101. It's 5:30 on Checkpoint. This is becoming a habit. Katrina Batten. Auckland Transport looks at dropping the speed limit on dozens of Auckland roads in a bid to cut the number of traffic deaths and injuries. That is coming up on the 8th anniversary of the first Christchurch earthquake, while one couple is still battling their insurers. And the ASB Classic Locks and Venus Williams return. It'd be wonderful to have one of those extraordinary sisters back in the country. Known as next with business news. But before any of it, here with the time at 5:30 is Katrina Batten.
TVNZ says its Pacific correspondent Barbara Drever has been released after being detained in Nauru while covering the Pacific Islands Forum. The aid group World Vision told TVNZ Ms Drever was interviewing a refugee when she was arrested by the police early this afternoon. The Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Trade says she was released just before 5 o'clock. The Nauru government has limited the movements of journalists and restricted who they can talk to during the summit. The police say they spent a lot of time investigating before carrying out raids at properties linked with race fixing today. They searched 10 properties and stables, 8 in Christchurch, 1 in Invercargill and another in Manawatu. Detective Superintendent Tim Anderson says they're likely to lay charges today and arrests could follow. Mr Anderson says a wider investigation is possible. The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Bosher, says gangs are using violence and intimidation to produce a very unhealthy situation at Whanganui prison. He made an unannounced visit to the prison in February, where he says 71% of prisoners were too afraid to report violence for fear of retribution. Judge Bosher says 2 of the prison's units had the highest number of recorded assaults of all lower North Island prisons. He says a strategy must be put in place to minimise violence and gang activity. The lawyer for a man who has admitted stealing $1.2 million from the trust that runs the Waitangi Treaty grounds says it's unlikely the money will be paid back. Wallace Tamamotu Te Ahuru, who was the trust's corporate services manager, admitted 2 charges of obtaining by deception and 7 of using forged documents in the Manukau District Court this morning. He'll be sentenced in November. The Prime Minister says the sidelined Minister, Meka Whaitiri, is contesting the allegations against her, and that's why an investigation is necessary. Ms Whaitiri has stepped aside as Customs Minister during an employment inquiry. RNZ News understands Ms Whaitiri is accused of manhandling her newly employed Press Secretary while in Gisborne on Monday last week. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much. You can duck into town, Katrina. Thanks, Katrina Batten. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. Shareholders in the wind power company Tilt Renewables have been advised to reject a takeover offer by majority shareholders Infratil and Mercury. Why?
Well, they're saying that it's not fair to the shareholders. It doesn't adequately value the company's potential. The offer was $2.30, 8% premium to the traded price at the time the offer was made middle of last month, so it was about $2.13 at that stage. Today it's trading at $2.30. The independent shareholders are saying, look, it's not a good enough offer, and they're saying to their shareholders, hang on, don't accept this offer, wait until we come back with a report with a recommendation. and I think they're expecting to get better than that.
Right. Have you heard, is there any suggestion as to how many shareholders have so far?
No, I don't know. We only just received the notice late this afternoon, and of course the offer has been made by the two big shareholders, Infratil and Mercury, of which they own together 70%. So
but one imagines if the offer is the same as the current market price, there's not going to be many people take it up, right?
No, well, right now we'll see what happens, because surely if you got time to wait, I think that you have to accept the offer by mid-October. So there's time. Shareholders should wait. That's the advice of the independent directors.
It's Money Week with plenty of advice for consumers, investors and businesses.
There sure is. And
who's giving all this advice and what's it about?
Oh my goodness, we've got advice from everybody, including advice about insurance, which was something you were just talking about. A lot of people are underinsured, according to some financial advisors. You know, they don't take out insurance on their health. They don't take out insurance on income protection, those kinds of things, life insurance,
they
you
can't
name
afford to.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, that's the other problem. We also have a lot of debt. Consumers are being advised to take care and to evaluate their debt. Kiwi savers are being told to spend a little bit more time to understand what's going on. Only 1 in 4 people who invest in KiwiSaver know what that understand or believe that they have a fairly good understanding of what that's about. And what's even more surprising is the target group between 30 and 50, which is your biggest earning years. Only 1 in 5 of those people said that they had a good understanding of what they were investing in. And the FMA say, listen, the main thing that you should do is figure out what your risk profile is and work out how much you're actually paying in fees, because that's now being disclosed, and then decide. But look, there's a lot of information out there, but one thing is for sure, this is the week to get your money in order. Get some advice if you need it.
Right.
There you go. Is that enough?
Yeah, fantastic. Now, what happened on the markets today?
Well, our top 50 index rose more than 1/3% by 35 points to 9,292, which is pretty good, because the market is overall in Asia a little bit spooked by what's happening with the trade wars going on between China and the United States, emerging markets, Argentina, you name it. There's a lot of things to worry about out there. Our dollar is trading at 66 US cents, and that's pretty good. It's been hanging on there for a few days now, and it's taken quite a battering against the US dollar, which is quite strong against most other currencies. Against the Australian, we're at 91.54, where we've been for a while, 51.3 pence, again, where we've been for a while.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. Well, on the 4th of September 2010, Canterbury began changing beyond recognition. In the wee hours of September the 4th, a 7.1 magnitude earthquake struck near Darfield, causing widespread damage across the entire region. While this quake did not result in the huge number of deaths seen in the February earthquake several months later, it signalled the start of the end of Canterbury as we knew it. 8 years on, you would have thought, well, most everything would have been fixed, but as we have seen countless times on Checkpoint, many insurance companies have made it impossible for people to move on. That is the case for Mike and Fran Dodge, who say their insurer AA has not honoured their insurance policy, and now the courts seem to be the only option left. Our Christchurch reporter Logan Church took his camera and went out to meet them.
When the shaking stopped, Mike and Fran Dodge's lives changed forever.
We had our earthquake sequence. It started in September, and we have assessments done by EQC, and they put ours down as minor for the September event, and they've actually settled us for that event. And we thought, oh, everything's okay, we'll get our house fixed. And then, of course, a few months later, we have another major incident with a February event, and left us with a shattered foundation and a damaged garage and broken driveway and plaster and things falling off the walls, kitchen in a mess, you know, just the usual for what us Christchurch people are used to.
Even though their house was a mess, their chimney collapsed, they were confident their insurer, AA, would be there to help get the house fixed and their lives back on track.
At this stage now, 7 years on, they've decided that all the foundation cracks in our house are all pre-existing to the earthquake, even though the EQC reports say otherwise, even though we've got photographs and other evidence to prove that they weren't there, or we might have had 1 or 2, which I knew about. I've owned the house since 1987, so I'm pretty familiar with what the structure of the house is like. And so now we're having to hire experts to fight to say that this is what was there. They're ignoring the best evidence they have, which is the homeowners' observations of what happened to their home.
So, in a nutshell, Mike says his insurer claims all of the foundation damage is pre-existing. Walking around the house today, damage is evident. The ring foundation is cracked. The floors built on concrete piles are not level. doors don't close. Fran is wheelchair bound. She suffers from multiple sclerosis. The brakes have to be put on her wheelchair whenever she is in her kitchen. Otherwise, she rolls away.
I've been insured with AA since 1994, and I've been a member of the Automobile Association for 36 years. So I thought, oh yeah, they'll look after us, it'll be no problem.
But what makes the situation so agonisingly frustrating for Mike and Fran is that their house is perfectly livable. It's just damaged enough that a complete repair would likely cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if they just sold up and left, they would be lucky to get land value and would be passing the problem on to someone else.
We can't move forward, you can't go back, you can't borrow money on a damaged property, you can't sell it for nothing, it's probably worth land value if you're lucky. And then if we sell it, someone else will patch it up, and then it'll be on the market again as an on, and someone else will buy it as an on-sold, which is now another problem that's come up in Christchurch.
Mike and Fran have now filed legal action against the insurer for a breach of human rights, breach of contract and breach of implied terms. A court date is yet to be determined. Fran says she has just had enough.
We have totally changed our feelings and everything. We used to be happy-go-lucky people, and now you walk into the house, there's been no repairs done at all, except for a couple of emergency repairs with tiles broken and that sort of thing for keeping the house dry and warm. And you walk in, I don't like going into the house as much. I sit out here on the deck more often, because you walk into the house and all you see is broken walls and everything, and it's not a happy-go-lucky home anymore. It's just a house that's keeping you dry and warm, that you can sleep in and, you know, do your bits and pieces. And that's the worst part of it.
Across Canterbury, there is still a long way to go before earthquake insurance issues are resolved. Even though private insurers have paid out at least $21 billion, more than 2,000 claims have yet to be settled as of the end of June. In Wellington today, the Minister for Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, says there is still a lot of work to do.
There's still unfinished business in Christchurch. People are still living in damaged homes, families are still coping with serious psychosocial impacts, and businesses are waiting for certainty. This government is committed to finishing the job and helping people move on with their lives.
But Mike Dodge has a simple message for his insurer.
Honour your policy, observe the damage yourself, come and have a look, send your CEO down, come and see me, let's go talk, and let's see what my policy entitles me to.
That invitation is and remains open. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, call Logan Church tēnei.
And in a statement, AA Insurance says it's committed to resolving the Dodgers' claim. It says it recognises the Dodgers as vulnerable customers, and it does accept the damage to their home was caused by the quakes. AA says it's met with the Dodgers, had discussions submitted and received reports, and suggested alternate dispute resolution procedures such as mediation. But it says the couple and AA's experts have come to different views on the damage to the home and how to fix it. It also says the Dodgers will not accept the outcome of a joint engineers report, and this is causing further delays. AA says it's happy to discuss resolving the situation when the Dodgers are ready. The man who was in charge of the finances of the trust that cares for the Waitangi treaty grounds stole more than $1 million and spent it on his luxurious lifestyle, including cosmetic surgery and adult entertainment. He appeared this morning in the Manukau District Court, where he admitted 2 charges of obtaining by deception and 7 of using forged documents. Edward Gay has been in court.
Wallace Te Ahuru was the man that held the purse strings for the trust, charged with caring for one of the most historically significant sites in the country, the Waitangi Treaty Grounds. It includes James Busby's homestead, the site of the Declaration of Independence signing in 1835, and 5 years later Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It fell into disrepair but was eventually bought by Governor-General Lord Bledisloe and gifted to the country in 1934. Te Ahuru was the corporate services manager, but used his position to feather his own nest, transferring $1.2 million of the trust's money to his own accounts and spending up on cosmetic surgery, gambling and adult entertainment, as well as a new vehicle. Today, the 30-year-old stood briefly in the dock at the Manukau District Court, where his lawyer Jeremy Bialetti entered guilty pleas on his behalf. Mr Bialetti told RNZ his client returned voluntarily from Australia.
He hasn't put the state to any expense to bring him back, and he's pleaded guilty and accepted responsibility straight off. He knows what he did was pretty bad, and he understands that he's going to have to be punished for it.
Te Āhuru began working for the Trust in 2012 before moving to its commercial arm, Waitangi Limited, in 2016 when his offending began. According to the agreed summary of facts, he made 43 payments to his personal account, taking $1,221,268.84. The Trust required 2 signatories to authorise payments from its accounts, but Te Āhuru got round this by using the name of a former employee and that of a colleague who was on sick leave. Mr Bialetti isn't hopeful that any of the money will be paid back.
I don't think so, because part of what occurred involved him trying to recoup money to pay it back, and unfortunately in that process he lost more money.
When the Trust's auditor started asking questions, Te Āhuru forged invoices. The auditor didn't ask any further questions. Today in court, Mr Bialetti asked to refer the case to a restorative justice conference.
If there's anything that can be done to help that situation, I think he would like to do it. But, he can only make the offer, and, we would entirely understand if it was turned down flat.
It's unknown if the Trust will take part. We wanted to ask if the fraud had affected the Trust's future plans and if it had put in place any changes since Te Āhuru's offending. Despite repeated phone calls and a text message, the Trust chair Peter Tipene did not return phone calls. A Waitangi source has told RNZ Te Āhuru was a trusted staff member and they were devastated by his dishonesty. He said the Trust had been extremely frugal since the offending and some planned projects have had to be put on the back burner. The Trust receives no government funding and relies largely on visitor fees for its income. The Regional Economic Minister Shane Jones says he has concerns about the Trust's commercial arm and he's previously suggested it should be shut down.
Well, the reality is we have to take them at their word that they've dealt with the issue. They got the SFO involved. They've been very open, and I'm told it was a comprehensive, thorough investigation and no one else is involved. But for the person who has committed this crime, I hope he gets support from his whānau, because his mental health is going to be under tremendous pressure.
Shane Jones says he's been assured by the Trust board that changes have been made. Te Āhuru's been remanded in custody and he'll be sentenced in November. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gaiaho.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. It's 13.5 to 6. The first major player for this summer's ASB Classic Tennis Tournament was confirmed today. After not featuring last summer, 7-time Grand Slam champ Venus Williams has been locked in for a return to the Auckland event. Also revealed today was a schedule change, with the tournament extended an extra day to run for a full week and twilight sessions added for the first few days. Clay Wilson caught up with tournament director Carl Budge at the announcement and asked how he orchestrated the comeback of Venus Williams.
She was the first person we spoke to this year, and a pretty quick yes. So, look, we were delighted. She started the year as our #1 priority. We really missed her last year, and thankfully it looks like she missed us too, and so she was pretty keen to come back.
Yeah, what were her motivations for wanting to come back?
I think this is it's just a place that works for her. Last time she was here, she made the final of the Australian Open the couple of weeks following, and that players get pretty superstitious with that sort of stuff. So, yeah, look, I think it was always, I've always been very confident that if she's playing week 1, she'll be playing in Auckland, and thankfully week 1 is her desire, and ASB Classic got her confirmed.
Securing a player this early, does it mean a nervous few months watching her, making sure she's going to stay healthy and fit?
Oh mate, with a player like Venus, you don't have to worry too much. She's one of the biggest names in sport in general, so regardless of sort of how she goes, we know that those sold out signs tend to get dusted off when Venus Williams plays. But look, you always watch. It's Venus gives, I mentioned in the press conference that Venus is probably the most desirable player for international tournaments, and the reason for that, she doesn't count as a top 10. So if she finishes inside top 10, it doesn't actually count. So it gives us that real freedom to go, we don't have to worry about her. What her rank does is not quite irrelevant, but pretty close to it. And so, that's why she becomes pretty high up our radar of why we would get her locked in early, because it gives you plenty of options.
So because of that, in terms of top 10s, you've obviously had Caroline a number of years now. Is she on your radar? I mean, top 10 players, what are you looking at?
Yeah, we will have a top 10 player. We've got a decision to make, a pretty hard one. We know Caroline loves it. She's never got the trophy here, and I know she muttered a couple of words to me as part of the presentation ceremony, lifting up second place last year, and I know she wants back. But we've also got a couple of other players that are pretty keen as well. And Sloane is still a defending champion here. She hasn't come back since she won the title. She wanted to come last year. We had to say no to her last year, and she's playing some amazing tennis at present. I think it'll be her or Serena that wins US Open this week. And then we've got likes of Simona Halep, #1 in the world, that I'm not sure that her pre-Australian Open plan previously has worked for her. And so I know she's looking to change things up as well. So we've got a pretty hard call to make over the next couple of weeks.
Tournament Director Carl Barge talking to our reporter Clay Wilson. The government's artificial limb service has apologised to an amputee after it named her in legal proceedings when it took the Health and Disability Commissioner to court. Now, Checkpoint has been following the case since the New Zealand Artificial Limb Service, or NZALS, a Crown agency, launched legal action against the head of another Crown entity, the Health and Disability Commissioner, in December of last year. But it also named an amputee as a defendant, and after months of legal proceedings, it reached a settlement with her last month and issued a written apology. As our producer Michelle Cook reports, while the court case might be settled, the amputee's battle is far from over.
Katrina Gutzel worked as a hairdresser for 3 days a week while volunteering and raising 2 children. She'd often spend nights out with her husband, mingling with friends and others in her local community. The fact she had no left leg was no barrier to a social and active life. That was the case for about 30 years after she lost her full leg from her hip down to bone cancer when she was 12. But that all changed 10 years ago when her prosthetist retired and she was assigned another one.
Basically, the man was just incapable of making me a limb. End of.
A prosthetist evaluates a client, fabricates and fits artificial limbs. Mrs. Gutzel says her prosthetist didn't make a limb that properly fitted in the 5 years she was under his care. She's since refused to be seen by him again. She says it was never aligned, causing her to bend over when she walked, and meant she always felt unstable, often causing her to fall. She has 3 physical treatment injury claims accepted by ACC, and ACC has also accepted a mental injury claim, accepting psychiatrist evaluations that the treatment injury is a significant causative factor for her major depressive disorder, something she says the court process has exacerbated.
The only time I leave the house is every 2 weeks to go to my counselling appointment. On that, I don't leave the house. I'm not comfortable. It's not safe. I'm completely on crutches. Have now been for over 2.25 years, and it's just my back just won't take wearing it anymore. The pain's just too intense. It's like I'm in prison, to be honest. That's how I feel.
Mrs. Gutzel's complaint about her treatment is one of 2 complaints about New Zealand Artificial Limb Service the Health and Disability Commission is currently investigating. As part of this investigation, the Commission obtained a report which it then released to Mrs. Gutzel under the Official Information Act. That prompted NZALS to take court action against Health and Disability Commissioner Anthony Hill, who refused to comment for the story. All 3 parties reached a settlement last month, which included suppressing the contents of the report.
The matter eventually settled, and there's an agreed statement, and I'm not able to go into the details of that. What I can say, however, is that the New Zealand Artificial Limb Service spent $146,000 of public money to fight that court action, and my client is really clear that it was a complete waste of public money, and she wonders, she knows that it could have been better spent.
That's Mrs. Gutzel's lawyer Martha Coleman, who you'll hear more from in further reports this week. She cited $146,000 in legal costs. It was actually $164,000. As part of the settlement, NZALS issued a written apology to Mrs. Gutzel for the distress it caused her and acknowledged the events that gave rise to the court action were not of her making. I asked NZALS CEO Sean Gray why the organisation named her as a party to the legal proceedings.
It was a requirement of the process, and so in this matter that we had with the HDC, the patient was named in the activity that went on. It was incredibly unfortunate that was required.
Mr Gray wouldn't say much more about the court case, so I asked him what's next for Mrs Gutzel. She refuses to be seen by NZALS and has seen 2 other private providers, but still doesn't have a leg she's comfortable with. Mrs Gutzel, who is one of more than 70 amputees in New Zealand with full leg amputations, wants NZALS to pay for her to be seen by an Australian prosthetist, who she has confidence in after being in his care 2 years ago while visiting Perth. Mr Gray says the situation is a complicated one. The Ministry of Health would have to approve the funding, and it generally believes if there are appropriately qualified prosthetists here, then that's where the treatment should be provided.
In some situations, it's very difficult, and we have an isolated situation where we haven't been able to get the right outcome, and in doing so, we will support her interests as best we can along that journey.
Mrs Gutzel says she'll never return to NZALS.
You go into the website, they talk the talk about how patient care is the centre of their most important thing. They talk it all, but when you complain, you certainly don't get that. Basically, I can't believe anybody would be so cruel as the treatment I've had from them, to be honest. It's just shocked me.
Minister of Social Development, Campbell is the minister responsible for NZALS. She declined to be interviewed on this issue. For Checkpoint, Michelle Cook.
Michelle will have more on amputees and the New Zealand Artificial Limbs Service, the NZALS, on Checkpoint later in the week. We would love to hear from people who have had experience of the NZALS. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's coming up to 4 minutes to 6. Myanmar is facing increasing international criticism for jailing 2 Reuters journalists who exposed the massacre of 10 Rohingya men in the Rakhine state. The men were murdered by local villagers and Myanmar state troops, having been forced to watch their own graves being dug first. Now, 2 of the reporters responsible for reporting that massacre to the world have been sentenced to 7 years in prison. The UN has described their arrest and trial as a travesty of justice, and the UK's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt says he will be raising the case during an upcoming visit to Myanmar. But from Myanmar and its government today, nothing but stony silence. The BBC's Nick Beake reports.
The depth of the anger and injustice this verdict triggered was clear outside court. Supporters of the Reuters journalists tried to block the police van, which was to drive the pair to prison to start their sentence. "Let them speak," the crowd shouted. Many are fearful these convictions are a sign the press will now be silenced in Myanmar. Warlone and Jorso U have always insisted they were framed. As he was dragged away, Warlone protested his innocence once again.
We've been unfairly accused. We've been convicted of breaching the Official Secrets Act. We respected ethical principles. We didn't do anything harmful to our nation. We didn't commit any crime.
The convictions have been greeted with a chorus of international condemnation. The UN, EU, human rights groups and many Western governments have voiced their concern. Dan Chugg is the British ambassador to Myanmar.
And this verdict and this sentence has undermined freedom of media in this country. It's also struck a hammer blow to the rule of law because, having seen the case throughout, we believe that the judge has ignored the evidence and actually ignored Myanmar laws. So it's a bad day for Myanmar.
Aung San Suu Kyi's government is now being urged to pardon the reporters, but there's been no reaction from her office. Last week, her government was accused by the UN of assisting a genocide against Rohingya Muslims. 3 years ago, there was great hope for Myanmar after Miss Suu Kyi won free elections. That hope is fading fast.
That report from the BBC's Nick Beake, quite an extraordinary situation. The work those 2 Reuters journalists did was of the very highest calibre. Lots of feedback coming in, lots of people sending us in details of their insurance experience. We had a serious road crash in Spain. The car hire company was so good they provided us with a translator and legal representation, but our New Zealand travel insurance would not pay out. I had a court hearing the next morning. Our lawyer negotiated with the court, so we had the choice of pleading guilty to careless driving, paying €100 fine and get back home, or having to stay in Spain for up to 3 months waiting for a court case, or returning to Spain whenever. It was a no-brainer. I was held overnight, so we were due to fly out that next night, and was considered a flight risk. This person says, my experience with travel insurance for my daughter who got ill in New York was a complete case of the company ducking for cover. I had to fly over to pay the bills for her hospital appointments at our outpatients, and my daughter ended up being hounded by debt collectors for months trying to recover the hospital bill of $12,000 per day. 3 days. Eventually the insurer agreed there was no pre-existing condition and settled the account. Had the bill been less, and had I been not so determined, I phoned every day. I may have given up. Thank you for all your texts and emails, a lot of them coming in tonight, and a lot of you with unhappy travel insurance experiences that you are relating. We appreciate hearing from you. Checkpoint at radionz.co.nz, or you can text us on 2101. After 6 o'clock, we're going to have the latest on Barbara Driver and what happened to her in Nauru, and we're going to talk to the police officer involved in this quite extraordinary raid on homes connected with harness racing in New Zealand.
RNZ News at 6. Maloi Lele, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and Aho. The TVNZ journalist Barbara Driver has been released by authorities in Nauru after being detained for hours this afternoon. Ms Driver is there to cover the annual Pacific Islands Forum. Here's our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell.
World Vision New Zealand says it helped Barbara Driver connect with refugees on Nauru, and it was contacted by its refugee liaison this afternoon. They said Ms Driver's interview had been stopped by the Nauru police and she was taken away with them. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade says she was released just before 5 o'clock. The Nauru government has limited the movements of journalists and restricted who they can talk to during the summit. The National Party says the Foreign Minister who's on Nauru must seek assurances from the government there that other members of the media will not be under threat of detention or interference. Atuiti whare parimata ko Chris Bramalaho.
The police haven't ruled out widening their race-fixing investigation to other parts of the country. They've been investigating the harness racing industry since April last year after reports of race-fixing surfaced. Dan Dalgety reports.
Properties and stables in Christchurch, Invercargill and Manawatu were searched by police today after being linked with race fixing. The warrants were the result of the long-running investigation into reports of corruption within the harness racing industry. Detective Superintendent Tim Anderson says a large team of officers began investigating the reports after being supplied with information from the Racing Integrity Unit. He says it's possible drug and race fixing charges could be laid, but that's still being determined. Tim Anderson says they treat race fixing as a very serious offence. This is Dan Dalgety.
Auckland Transport is looking at dropping the speed limits on dozens of roads in a bid to cut the number of traffic deaths and injuries in the region. Representatives from the Transport Agency were today grilled at an Auckland Council meeting over serious road crashes which have surged by 70% since 2014. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says the figures were appalling and called for a better explanation than was provided by AT.
Why has Auckland done so badly? Because if we don't understand the why, we don't understand what needs to be done to resolve it.
The Auckland Mayor, Phil Goff. The lawyer for the man who has admitted siphoning off $1.2 million from the trust that cares for the Waitangi treaty grounds says there's little hope of the money being paid back. Wallace Tamamotu Te Ahuru appeared this morning in the Manukau District Court, where he admitted 2 charges of obtaining by deception and 7 of using forged documents. Edward Gay reports.
Te Ahuru was the Trust's corporate services manager, but used his position to transfer $1.2 million to his own accounts. He spent it on cosmetic surgery, gambling, adult entertainment and a new vehicle. His lawyer, Jeremy Bioletti, told Radio New Zealand News his client returned voluntarily from Australia to face the prosecution. But he says Te Ahuru spent some of the money on failed investments, so recovering any looks unlikely. Te Ahuru will be sentenced in November. I Tāmaki Makoto ko Edward Gaiaho.
2 people have been injured in a parachute accident and a paraglider crash in different parts of the South Island today. A 29-year-old man received moderate injuries from a parachute accident in Queenstown shortly before 3:30 this afternoon. The Civil Aviation Authority is investigating. It followed a paraglider crash near Wanaka shortly after midday. A woman suffered serious injuries and is being treated at Dunedin Hospital. Japan's weather agency says the strongest typhoon to hit the country in 25 years has made landfall with winds of up to 216 kilometres an hour. The agency has warned Typhoon Jebi will bring high waves, flooding and mudslides to the Tokushima region of western Japan. More than 600 flights have been cancelled and the high-speed bullet train has been suspended between Osaka and Hiroshima. Evacuations have been ordered in some areas. Fast food portions are getting bigger and saltier. Auckland University researchers say that between 2012 and 2016, fast food servings grew by 5% in size. There was a 12% increase in sodium per serve. The lead researcher, Dr. Helen Isles, says the energy in each serving also rose by 13%.
It's about the amount of energy that you might find in half a banana or half a muesli bar additional, so added to that meal over a 5-year period. It may not seem that much, but if you had that added to your hamburger and added to your beverage and added to your fries, that could add up quite considerably.
Dr. Isles says while fast food manufacturers may be adding some healthier items to their menus, the research shows the good that achieves it is outweighed by the growing number of less healthy products they're producing. It's 5 minutes past 6. Sport, Roger Federer has made a shock exit from the US Tennis Open. The 5-times champion was beaten in 4 sets by the unseeded Australian John Millman in the round of 16. Millman advanced to a quarter-final matchup against 6th seed Novak Djokovic. The All Blacks coaching staff says despite a number of players injured or on the mend, it doesn't make the selection process any easier. The All Blacks will face Argentina this weekend in the Rugby Championships, but with Sonny Bill Williams ruled out and duo Ryan Crotty and Sam Cane only continuing to improve, the balance of giving opportunities versus continuity can be a struggle.
The objective of the week is to have a great performance on the Saturday, and that's what we want to do. And so, and from then on, we actually look at the who needs time, who's playing well, is going to benefit from staying in there. Like, it's not just about the guys that haven't played; it's about some guys actually get better as they're in the saddle more and more. And selections is challenging now as it probably ever has been in the last few years.
Ian Foster. The Warriors coach Stephen Kearney is leaving no stone unturned for this week's NRL playoff match against the Penrith Panthers on Saturday by introducing a new method to combat distractions. While training, speakers were placed at the end of the field playing crowd noise to mimic a finals environment, forcing the team to concentrate on overcoming any communication barriers they may come up against.
It was a distraction for myself, so pretty sure that it was for the players, and so they get an awareness of what it possibly could be like on on Saturday. The boys got a bit of a taste of it on Friday night. Actually, they said it was really loud against the Raiders, and that's where communication and coordination becomes important.
Stephen Kearney. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples the latest from the Finn family, along with some West African soft rock. Our Wind on the World takes us behind the lines in Syria, and we host Wellington's very own Filipino choir.
31 fellows who have completed the year-long residency will be in town for the Robert Burns Week.
Roger Hall, Brian Turner, Stella McQueen, Victor Roger, Catherine Chidgey.
All those wonderful people.
Yeah.
That's Lately with Karen Haight on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel Bay of plenty in Taupō. Occasional showers, some heavy, becoming isolated this evening and fine breaks increasing. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms easing north of Wairoa tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti. Occasional rain or showers, gale southerlies about Taranaki. Wairarapa and Wellington, periods of rain, heavy at times, southerlies, gale in exposed places. Bulletu Fiordland, also Nelson and inland Marlborough, fine. For the remainder of Marlborough, also Canterbury, mostly cloudy with scattered showers clearing south of Christchurch tonight. Gale southerlies about the Marlborough Sounds easing tomorrow. Otago and Southland, areas of cloud clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Fog about some inland valleys tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, the odd shower clearing early tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Thank you everyone for being with us. Well, outside the discussions, rather tense discussions around Australian detention centres and of course climate change, sea levels rising, the Pacific Islands Forum, which has got all of this to deal with and more, took on an even more dramatic edge today with the detention and then release of a New Zealand journalist. TVNZ's Barbara Drever was detained by Nauru police while doing an interview with a refugee. She's now been released but has been stripped of her accreditation for the forum. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters spoke to reporters in Nauru a short time ago.
I heard that she's been released and that she's out, so to speak, and can go upon her way.
Were any charges laid?
She would not have been released had charges been laid. No.
Yeah, so you understand she was just talked to for a short time. What was she told, do you know?
Well, you can go.
That she can go.
What was she doing?
I don't know. Nothing's changed from what I didn't know a quarter of an hour ago, other than to say that she's been released.
It's Winston Peters. Earlier he floated the idea of a law change to help break the stalemate of New Zealand's offer to resettle 150 refugees from either Nauru or Manus Island. There's concern by Australian officials that refugees would go to New Zealand only to move to Australia as soon as they are eligible. Winston Peters said he didn't know what Barbara Drever was doing. Well, at the beginning of the program tonight we had the head of World Vision telling us exactly what she was doing. She was interviewing refugees up there as organised by World Vision and as she had been told she was able to do by the Nauru government when she was detained and held by police officers. Our political reporter Gia Garrick is in Nauru and Gia filed this report.
There has been a long-standing offer from New Zealand to take 150 refugees under both National and Labour, one Australia has steadfastly refused to take up. One reason given is it would create a backdoor into Australia, defeating the whole purpose of its tough approach to boat people. But Winston Peters says there could be a law change to stop that happening. He says he's known about the issue for nearly 20 years, raised it and nobody listened.
If the issue was that was their concern, that by letting them come to New Zealand they will gain rights to Australia, we can fix that up. So that's not really a concern in my view.
In 2016, the then Prime Minister John Key believed such a law change would create two classes of citizenship in New Zealand and was not willing to amend the law accordingly. The Greens co-leader James Shaw says while every effort should be made to alleviate the suffering of the refugees, the broader implications have to be taken into consideration.
That is a terrible, inhumane situation that they are in, and I applaud any effort that we are making to try and resolve that situation. I think that getting into dual classes of citizenship is a pretty slippery slope, and I feel very uncomfortable about that.
National's immigration spokesperson Michael Woodhouse echoes those concerns.
It would create two tiers of residency, and the previous government was very careful not to do that. This is really a matter for Australia to decide who comes into its country.
A cautious response too from the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who flies to Nauru for the day tomorrow.
The offer of 150 places for refugees from Manus and Nauru has remained on the table for some time now, and issues around whether or not that would then allow them to re-enter into Australia are entirely within Australia's purview and their control. So that is a matter for them, it's a matter for their law, and has no effect on our offer.
Any law change would have to be made by the Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway.
Who gets into Australia is Australia's business. That's the position I've generally held. If colleagues have ideas, I'm certainly happy to consider them, but generally it's a sovereign nation's right to determine who can cross their own border. It's not up to us to determine who can go in and out of Australia.
And what does he think of Winston Peters floating new policy out of the blue?
I think he's proposing ideas. That's not announcing policy on the hoof.
Refugees on Nauru say they'd much prefer to come to New Zealand than go to Australia. They say it takes 5 years before a refugee is able to apply for citizenship and a passport regardless. In Nauru for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
It's 13 minutes past 6. Arrests and charges are understood to be imminent following raids at 10 properties and horse stables across Christchurch, Invercargill and Manawatu today. The raids relate to corruption and race fixing alleged in the harness racing industry and involve a number of high-profile trainers and drivers. Police Superintendent Tim Anderson told me the National Organised Crime Group has been working with the Racing Integrity Unit since April of last year.
Today's termination of a fairly lengthy serious crime investigation by the Police National Organised Crime Group into an alleged race-fixing bunch of individuals in the harness racing industry. This is an investigation that began in April of last year as a result of information we received from the Racing Integrity Unit. And we've just investigated thoroughly over that time and terminated that today. It's an ongoing investigation, so we have a number of people to speak to, but this is just day one.
Gosh, April of last year, so in that time, have individuals been under surveillance?
Look, I can't talk to the tactics or any details of the operation other than that it has been treated as a very serious crime, and we have investigated it thoroughly.
And what, I just want to confirm it's been under the auspices of the National Organised Crime Group?
That's right.
Okay. Are these charges, if they are laid, have charges been laid yet?
Look, at the moment we're talking to a number of people in Christchurch, in Invercargill and Manawatu. I expect that charges will be laid at some stage this afternoon, and people will be appearing in court either tomorrow or in the coming few days.
And D.S. Anderson, will those charges be under Section 240A of the Crimes Act? That's
certainly the section that we're looking at. That's Section 240A and Section 240 sort of go together.
Yeah, they do. So 240A focuses 240 on match fixing effectively. And if I look at 240A1, it says any act or omission that is done or omitted with intent to influence a betting outcome. So that's what you're looking at here.
That's right. That's the primary crux of or the centre of this investigation. In this case, it's race fixing, which is, I guess to a layman, it's better explained by it's a manipulating a race result with the intention of influencing a betting outcome.
Okay, so one might speculate like it would be so that it might be doing things like not allowing a horse to run as well as it might otherwise run with a view to not having it win, for example?
Yeah, there's a number of scenarios that you could speculate. I just can't go into the details right now.
Okay, and one of the people who has been named by our colleagues at Stuff is identifying himself as a significant punter. So you are, it looks, covering people right across racing, from owners, riders and people who bet.
Yeah, look, we've been certainly interested in a number of individuals. I can't go into the details at this stage.
I just want to confirm, so you said in the first answer, or the first or second answer, and we really appreciate you being available for this interview, that charges will be laid, probably this afternoon or possibly tomorrow morning, or this evening or tomorrow morning. Have people been arrested?
Look, I don't have that information to hand. I've been out of the office in the last couple of hours just working with media, so it's possible that people may have been arrested by now. They've certainly been speaking to police and certainly been interviewed by police, so I'd expect that naturally there will be some arrests over the coming days.
Right. Look, this is absolutely sub judice, and people have the right to be regarded as innocent until proven guilty. But in terms of the charges being laid, is there a precedent for such a significant operation in New Zealand history that you know of?
In terms of this type of investigation, this is the first of its type that I'm aware of in New Zealand. The probably closest would be in Australia.
Police Detective Superintendent Tim Anderson, who has been working on this with the National Organised Crime Group since April of last year. It's coming up to 18 minutes past 6. Auckland Transport is looking at dropping the speed limit on dozens of Auckland roads in a bid to cut the number of traffic deaths and injuries in the region. Representatives from the transport agencies were today grilled at an Auckland Council meeting over serious road crashes in Auckland, which have surged by 70% since 2014. Matthew Tunison was at the meeting.
64 people died and 749 were seriously injured on Auckland's roads last year, and the statistics keep getting worse. Auckland Transport says the city's road deaths and injuries increased by about triple the rate of the rest of New Zealand. AT is now investigating lowering the speed limits at many accident black spots to stem what its chairman Lester Levy called a roading crisis.
If a person walking is hit by a vehicle at 30 kilometres per hour, there's a 10% risk of death compared to 80% risk at 50 kilometres per hour. It has to be said that lowering speeds is the most critical issue around reducing deaths and serious injuries.
The list of roads being investigated for lower speed limits includes Tamaki Drive, Great South Road, Onehunga Mall, Sandringham Road, the Coatesville Riverhead Highway and many more. Speeds on rural roads may go down to 80 kilometres an hour from 100, and limits in the central city and suburban centres may be lowered from 50 to 30. Lester Levy appeared before combative Auckland councillors at the Planning Committee meeting today and came under fire with questions about what was being done to reduce the grim statistics. Mayor Phil Goff said the figures were appalling and called for a better explanation than was provided by AT.
Why has Auckland done so badly? Because if we don't understand the why, we don't understand what needs to be done to resolve it.
Councillor Linda Cooper was disappointed nothing appeared to have changed since the implementation of the regional fuel tax, which helps to fund road safety.
My understanding was there was going to be huge safety improvements. Huge. I did vote for it, under the understanding that there'd be something for my community, rural and poor. They would see some results for that. I see 4 investigations into footpaths here.
Councillor Mike Lee said AT seemed to have avoided reporting on the impact of trucks with trailers on the roads.
It would be good to get a little bit more rigorous data, and I hope the board of Auckland Transport is getting better information than this.
Councillor Daniel Newman said he was underwhelmed with AT's report, while Josephine Bartley questioned whether the agency was just doing what it wants rather than what Aucklanders want.
I have people in my area that have had to go to the media, that have had to do petitions to get Auckland Transport to do something, and you don't listen and you don't act.
Lester Levy said AT was very unhappy with the figures and that a change in the road safety narrative was required. He said there was lots of work to do. AT will begin investigating lowering speed limits next year. Ko Matthew Tunison, aho.
21 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. A man who was killed by an explosion inside a shed in a West Auckland property has been described as a real motorhead who used the shed to work on cars. Last night's blast at a property in Henderson rocked nearby houses and left big pieces of debris hanging in a nearby tree. Today, the police, along with fire and emergency services, have continued to investigate the cause. Our reporter Katie Scotcher has been at the scene, and Katie filed this report.
Outside the Henderson house today, 2 officers guarded entrances and rows of emergency vehicles lined the street. Orange do not enter tape lined the perimeter of the property, and investigators in blue boiler suits could be seen from the entrance of the driveway picking up debris. A man who asked not to be named lives at the Universal Drive property. He has been unable to re-enter the property and only returned this morning to collect personal belongings from the cordon. Some neighbours suspected the shed where the blast occurred was used as a P-lab, but he says it was a tool shed.
Pretty much your basic decked out petrol head 7, you know, any size spanner, ring spanner, drill, screw, anything like it, you'll find it in there. Compressor do like filling up tyres or, you know, just for blowing off dust and things like that. It was like a heaven for all men who love working on cars.
The man killed in the blast is understood to be a father of 2. RNZ understands he didn't live at the house, but worked on cars in the shed. The resident describes him as a real motorhead.
He does work for one of the residents that live here. He's quite good with his welding skills. He's did some patching up work on one of residents' cars, and he's just since then been on and off the scene every now and then, like a month or so or something, just helping out where he can, or being hired to fix things up.
Neighbour Cetus Shanks was folding socks when she heard the explosion.
Like a massive firework. You know, when you go to the displays, it would probably be like that times 10 maybe. It was a huge noise, yeah. I'd never heard such a loud bang actually.
Miss Shanks says she smelt burnt wire and chemicals wafting from the site. Fetasia Timi lives opposite the property and says once they heard a loud bang, neighbours swarmed onto the street.
There was everybody standing and all the cars stopped and watching what's going on.
The police say a scene examination is still underway and it is too early to determine the cause of the explosion. Immediate neighbours who were told to leave their homes last night were able to return to their properties this morning. I tamaki makoto mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher-aho.
6:23 Some fast food outlets are hailing the inclusion of wraps and salads in their menus, but according to University of Auckland research, the overall trend is towards bigger portions of unhealthy foods. The study, Fast Food Trends in New Zealand, looked at 10 fast food chains, including Burger King, Domino's Pizza and McDonald's, using information available at branches and on the company's websites. Now, they found that between 2012 and 2016, serving sizes across all products grew by 5%, along with a 12% increase in sodium per serving. The figures were presented at a symposium in Wellington today, looking at how New Zealand can tackle diet-related diseases. Anne-Marie May was there.
Pizzas, fries, burgers, fizzy drinks. When New Zealanders order at the counter, they're getting more for their money. But lead researcher Dr. Helen Isles says that's a problem. She says as well as the portion size and salt content increasing, the energy in each serving also rose by 13% during the 5 years of the study.
About the amount of energy that you might find in half a banana or half a muesli bar additional, so added to that meal over a 5-year period. It may not seem that much, but if you had that added to your hamburger and added to your beverage and added to your fries, that could add up quite considerably.
Jim Mann, a professor in human nutrition and medicine at the University of Otago, says obesity rates in this country point to the growing harm done by factors such as larger portion sizes. He says New Zealand's now near the top of the world league tables for obesity.
10 years ago, we were roughly on a par with countries with which we often compare ourselves, the UK, Finland, for example. But we have rapidly increased, so that although obesity rates have increased in some of those countries, we are now streets ahead of them in terms of our obesity rates.
Dr. Isles says some food companies are interested in reducing salt and sugar in their foods, but it is not enough. She says the World Health Organization has set a target for countries to reduce their salt consumption by 2025, and that could be met if some nutrition targets were set for fast food manufacturers here as well.
They would meet a certain standard and then we reduce them further and then further until we meet the top, so that we feel like manufacturers have a realistic target to meet in the short term and then that gets extended out over time.
Helen Isles says it's important something is done sooner rather than later because as people's weight increases, so does blood pressure and the risk of heart disease and other illnesses. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
RNZ contacted McDonald's, Burger King and a KFC for comment. We're yet to hear back from them. We're sure we will, though. There's anger and grief in Brazil after the loss of the country's national museum to a massive fire, which has largely been blamed on funding cuts. The 200-year-old building, which housed 20 million artefacts, was engulfed in flames yesterday. Now it's a burnt-out shell. For Brazilians, it was the equivalent of the Louvre in Paris or the British Museum in London. Remarkably, though, it had no sprinkler system. The BBC's Katie Watson is in Rio, and Katie sent this report.
Firefighters worked into the early hours of this morning to bring the flames under control. The fire's now out and the devastation is clear. The yellow palace that was once the residence of the Portuguese royal family is now a charred shell. Every window is burnt out and the inside is black. Hundreds of employees stood watching, many of them wiping away tears. One of them is a historian, Regina Dantas.
It seems like a nightmare. I went to sleep thinking it was a nightmare, that I was going to wake up from it.
No. The museum housed items connected to Brazil's history, as well as other countries. It included fossils, a meteorite, and even a 12,000-year-old human skeleton of a woman. All of these are thought to have been destroyed. But this isn't just Brazilian history that's gone up in flames. Many see this as a metaphor for the country's recent economic and political crises. Its employees feel the museum was long ignored and underfunded, a victim of cuts in public spending in recent years. Paolo Buckup is a researcher.
This is the result of the economic crisis and the lack of investment in one of the most important things in a nation, which is science and technology and cultural knowledge about itself.
President Michel Temer said the loss of its archives was incalculable, calling it a sad day for all Brazilians. Marina Silva, a candidate for October's presidential elections, said it was like a lobotomy of the Brazilian memory. There's a lot of soul-searching going on as to how and why something like this happened.
Katie Watson with that report, a lobotomy of the Brazilian memory. What an extraordinary phrase. Just before we go tonight, we've read out quite a bit of feedback on people having bad travel insurance experiences. Well, I think we've got a couple of good ones here. When our daughter suffered multiple fractures in a skateboarding accident in California, the travel insurer was fantastic. On the night of the accident, he contacted the hospital on our behalf and was able to give us the details of her injuries. A few days later, I was flown to her bedside and had all my travel-related expenses, including a thank you dinner for the friends who'd supported her before my arrival, covered by the insurer. Goodness gracious. When she was well enough, the insurer paid us to fly home together business class because you can't really do cattle class with a broken leg and 2 broken arms. Back in New Zealand, they continued to cover her treatment costs. She'd been out of the country too long to qualify for ACC, and these included 2 separate physiotherapy programs and a number of GP and emergency room visits to deal with an infection, an allergic reaction, etc., etc. I'm so sorry many of your listeners have had bad experiences, but there are good insurers out there, says Jackie from North Coast. That's extraordinary, Jackie. Hi, John. Hearing the accounts of dodgy travel insurance companies, allow me to offer some evidence for the defence. A couple of years ago, we hired a motorhome for a South Island holiday, taking out vehicle cover with rentalcars.com. A minor altercation with the car park building on the final evening saw us cause $2,000 worth of damage to the motorhome. When I sent the paperwork through, they reimbursed us within 30 minutes. How's that, mate? Well, it's really good, Jeff. Thanks for your feedback. It's lovely to hear from you. Have a wonderful evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A TVNZ journalist detained while interviewing a refugee in Nauru says the police told her she was breaching her visa conditions and she's been offered a flight home. A detective investigating corruption in the harness racing industry says drug and race-fixing charges could be laid and the probe widened to other areas. The police won't take any further action after speaking to the press secretary at the centre of the Mecca Waitangi case. And the Court of Appeal has today ruled that shark cage diving is an offence under the Wildlife Act. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Liam Finn becomes a partner in the family business on Light Sleeper, the first album by Neil and Liam Finn. Wellington Trio, the all-seeing hand, deliver brutal studies of power and politics on syntax.